Okay.
Yeah. So let's just explore.
Great. Thank you for coming. I'm Christian Ørsted, and I'm sitting here with Amy Edmondson, professor of Harvard Business School, and rated 7th most influential HR thinker in the world. Trying to embarrass you right off the bat here. And author of this book here, Teaming. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm wondering, now we conducted a full day of MBA lecture at AVT Business School. What is your unique take on leadership and management?
I think of leadership as the activity, the function that is required to get organizations and the people in them to do extraordinary things. Leadership isn't needed for the ordinary. And by extraordinary, I don't mean fantastic feats like the rescue of 33 Chilean miners. I mean small, extraordinary abilities, like the ability to see another person's point of view and really accept it as a point of view that's as important as your own. That's an extraordinary thing. So I think of leadership as the function in an organization that gets us able to act and think in ways that are larger than our own needs and small concerns and interests, and to line up to together do great things.
Mm-hmm. And yet those things are very tied together. You're talking about the Chilean miners and the day-to-day conversations that we have. How does that tie together?
I think they are tied together because in order to accomplish an astonishing success like the rescue of 33 Chilean miners, 750 meters under rock that's harder than granite with no known access, no egress, people have to work together extraordinarily well. They have to work together tirelessly. They have to be innovative. They have to listen intently to each other's perspectives. And then they have to experiment, try things out, learn from the failures that they invariably will encounter in the early part of the process, learn quickly and try something else, and then keep going. This is both an exhilarating and a potentially very exhausting way to work. But it's the way that new discoveries are made. It's the way that innovation occurs, and often the way that great results are achieved.
Well, that's one of the things that really piques my interest in your research, is that you take learning in a crisis setting and a crisis context. And usually I meet organizations where things are going well, then we can afford the learning. But when we're in crisis mode, we have a very difficult time hearing dissenters, listening to everybody, including all points of view. What do you see?
I think that part of the challenge is that we have historically in business equated learning with something that's done in a classroom. You know, we invest in training, we invest in leadership development. That's learning. That's done offline. And then we get back online and do the real work of the organization. Nothing could be further from the truth in a fast-paced, fast-moving, fast-changing world in which the knowledge is constantly changing and the interdependency is very great indeed. So in a world where the answers aren't clear, in a world where the pace of change is high and the work is fundamentally very interdependent, we have no choice but to learn as we go, to be learning actively in action. So I call this, I sometimes refer to this as execution as learning. It's not learning, then execution. It's execution with a learning mindset and the discipline of paying very, very careful attention to what the experiences we're having are teaching us.
And in that frame, you have developed the concept of teaming, because something about work is different. Yet every time I open a new management book, it's proposed that now work is different. And I'm wondering, what do you see being the different now from management previously?
One of the ways that the work is changing is toward greater and greater need to work together to get important things done. So that's greater interdependence. Full stop. The work has more interdependence, whether it's taking care of a cancer patient, rescuing miners, or designing a new product. You can't do any of those things well without a great deal of coordination and collaboration among a variety of people with slightly different skill sets than your own. More and more of the work that we're confronted with in today's organizations has those interdependencies. And, making matters worse, the interdependencies are constantly shifting. So it's not as if, okay, we've figured out where the interdependencies are, let's create a nice team and let them stay together for the next 2 years. It doesn't work that way. Things are shifting too frequently and too fast to compose stable teams that can just get it all right and get better and better at getting it right. So I use the word teaming to shed light on this phenomenon. The fact is, teamwork is as important as it ever was, if not more important, but stable, well-composed, well-managed teams are increasingly a thing of the past. There's fewer and fewer aspects of the work that you can throw a very stable team at it and expect them to stay together for a long time. Sometimes we have a small core team, but then lots of other people teaming in and out of the process because they're only needed for a smaller portion of the work. Or sometimes we have 24/7 operations that require just very complex scheduling. Imagine firefighting crews or something like that, where it's not always going to be a stable team by necessity. So you've got to be able to get up to speed quickly with a new set of people and team with them rather than being on a team with a set of very familiar people.
And so different skills needed from being a member of a stable team to being able to do teaming as a verb?
Well, the managerial skills that are needed for stable teams are first and foremost the ability to design a good team, to compose a good team, to get the right members on it, to give them the supports and the training and the coaching that they need. So it's more about design and structuring of a group to be able to do the work, whereas teaming is much more about relating on the fly, being able to quickly get up to speed with someone new that you don't know very well, letting them know who you are, what you bring, what you're trying to get done, what you're up against, and then just as quickly finding out those same aspects about them. So teaming is much more about building fast relationships, building trust on the fly, than about the managerial structures of good teamwork.
And what does that entail for the team members? Is there different skills that need to be trained in order to...
It puts a greater emphasis on interpersonal skills, on the ability, on emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and pick up subtle cues about what other people are thinking and feeling, to be responsive to that. It requires curiosity. You've got to be fundamentally very curious about who other people are so that you don't forget to recognize the value they're bringing to the joint endeavor. All of us are hardwired to favor our own perspective. That's natural. And if we stop there, we don't get very far in teaming. So teaming calls for interpersonal skills, for curiosity, for empathy. It's part of an emotional intelligence, the ability to feel another person's perspective and take that seriously. And inquiry, the ability to ask questions, following up on that curiosity. And I think passion and energy, commitment to, this is a hard way to work, really. It's not easy. So in order to be willing to do this and to be willing to get better and better at it, I have to care deeply about the work and the purpose of our organization.
But that sounds how a lot of leaders would like to perceive themselves. Is there a bridge or blind angles, blind spots that we have that keeps us from being efficient in teaming?
I think you're right. I think many leaders, if not most leaders, would see themselves as passionate about an important purpose, as curious, as caring about others, and yet, in action, particularly when the stakes are high and things are heating up and things are moving fast, it's very natural, very spontaneous because of the way we're hardwired, that our own perspective seems more important than others. It just feels accurately true, right? It feels like what I see is reality, not is my perception of reality. And so all of us have a gap between the values we hold and the behaviors we aspire to consistently display and our actual behavior. Chris Argyris called this the gap between our espoused theories and our espoused values and our theories in use, or our enacted values. We can't help it. And I think we have to be a little bit forgiving of even ourselves, because we aren't always living up to our ideals. And yet, our job, I think, is to just continually strive to do better.
So, I'm a good manager, I'm open to new ideas, yet if you don't agree with me, I have an emotional response sometimes. What do you recommend I do?
I recommend a simple sort of 3-step mental process, right? It's I got this from Larry Wilson, who I worked for many years. Stop, challenge, choose. So stop is the simple act of interrupting the emotion, which feels so appropriate and so natural. I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, or I find you disagreeable. I have to stop, sometimes take a deep breath, and then just very quickly, inside my own head, challenge. Is this perception really based on verifiable fact? And is it helping me and or helping us get where we need to go? And if not, then I need to choose a different response. And the different response should fundamentally be one of, at the very least, curiosity. So I have to shift from, I can't believe you see it that way, to, I wonder why you see it that way. That's actually not that big a leap. It's still hard to do, but if I can remind myself to just be a little bit curious as to why you're so wrong-headed, then I may remember to actually ask you a genuine question, and then I may learn, and then you may learn, and we may get somewhere together.
But what if it is a group dynamic? We do a meeting in a team, and we have a lot of different points of view. As a manager, what do you recommend I do to make sure that the discussion is kept on track and it's a process worthy of all team members' time?
I think as a manager, one of your first responsibilities is to manage the process. And manage process doesn't mean, it could involve, but it doesn't mean a sort of checklist like let's keep the agenda moving forward. It means great attention to the phenomena that don't always get our attention. Who looks uncomfortable? Who's been silent? And making sure to bring them in, making sure to and let's use the whiteboard. Let's get the ideas we have out there. Let's look at them. Let's consider them together. Let's dig in. Let's analyze. So we have to understand that good process around important issues or decisions does not happen naturally. It doesn't spontaneously erupt that we have beautiful analysis and wonderful inclusion of multiple perspectives. No, it takes effort. It takes leadership to address and keep that process alive.
Yeah, and it also takes a sense of psychological safety. You discuss in your work how if there's not a sense of psychological safety, the most important dissenters might not offer the critical information we need to make the right decisions.
So one of the most important jobs of any manager, any leader, is to work like crazy to build a culture or a climate of psychological safety. And I define that as a culture in which everyone understands that they have both a responsibility and an expectation to speak up with ideas, questions, concerns, and that they won't be punished or humiliated for doing so. So it's okay to raise crazy ideas. It's okay to talk about mistakes. It's okay to bring up failures and so on. And I understand that that's part of my job as an individual, and a leader understands that it's part of his or her job to create that shared belief, or else we won't come up with anything new. We won't innovate. We won't catch and correct error when it comes along, because human beings are very sensitive to interpersonal risks. We are quite concerned about what others think of us. And so the natural fallback position is that I want you to think well of me, so I'm not going to say something I think might make me look stupid or incompetent or intrusive or any other negative attribute. And so it's the job of the leader, the highest status person around, to make sure everyone understands anything goes. It's required. The nature of the work today requires us to be this way, to have this kind of environment.
But when we are facing critical challenges, often we just like to know what to do. If there's a fire, you want to know how to put it out quickly. If you have a space shuttle with a crisis, you want to move on and eliminate all the concerns that are not really important. And in hindsight, you will know which was the important pieces of information. How do you distinguish that?
If the building is on fire, we must quickly get to the exits and get out of here. The fascinating thing, that's clear, right? The fascinating thing is that human beings often treat the situation that they're wrestling with around the table as if it were the building on fire, and respond in similarly hurried and rote manners, right? It's a rote and an important learned rote response to get out of a burning building. We should do that. However, we should not mistake actually an important strategic issue about a potential risk with our product launch or a hiring decision or a company acquisition as a burning building. It isn't. In fact, we may feel a lot of time pressure. It may be critically important that we get it right. You mentioned the safety in the shuttle program. That's an example of a topic for which it's critically important that we get it right. Nonetheless, I would argue that it then becomes even more important that we get process right, because left to our own devices, we'll come up with the simplest but unlikely to be the best answer. So the challenge of talking about these issues is that clearly many of the types of decisions that we study and analyze and try to make sense of have occurred in the past. By definition, they've occurred in the past. So then we analyze them and we try to use them to explain to people the kinds of dynamics that are quite expected and how problematic they are. And then people get worried about the hindsight bias. They say, well, it's easy to see that it's flawed in retrospect. But at the time, nobody could have known. That's generally not the case, because you can generally dig into the nobody could have known statement and find it to be faulty. You can find a half dozen people who knew, but were afraid to speak up.
And from a management perspective, what keeps us from getting that knowledge?
I think when we are a manager, when we're in charge, when there's a lot at stake, we become in the grips of a fear response. We might not label it as that, because it's not like we're terrified and we want to run out of the building, but we're anxious. There's a low level of, okay, we got to get this right. And I feel when I'm anxious, when someone is anxious, they are more likely to feel like it is their duty to control things, not to enable things. But trying to control almost always backfires, because you don't get the subtle data. You don't get the hidden concerns and ideas that in fact are mission critical to bring forward.
What surprises you when you study teamwork and organizations?
I guess it surprises me again and again how, as human beings, our are very natural responses to some of the social situations we're in, by which I mean workplace social situations, are so counterproductive. And why is that surprising? Well, it's surprising because we would imagine we're so capable, human beings. We've done remarkable things, individually and collectively. But we evolved as human beings for a different time. We evolved to respond quickly to a sudden threat, a saber-toothed tiger, and we run. And in the modern complex world that we live in, there are very few saber-toothed tigers, and yet we have a bad habit of responding to that initial feeling of anxiety or fear in the wrong way. Just when we should be digging in and analyzing and problem-solving and learning as fast as we can, we have much more of a kind of a fight or flight response. We're not as, sort of rational as we think we are, and that's a perpetual surprise. Right? I mean, I think I've spent a fair amount of time in front of business school classrooms talking about the need for psychological safety in order to help people take interpersonal risks, which are crucial to their ability to learn and to team. Right? So it's very hard for me to collaborate effectively with other people if I'm not willing to take interpersonal risks. I've got to be able to let my guard down. So I talk about this a great deal, and at a certain point there is always an executive who will raise his hand and say, this is all very well and good. I understand conceptually the need for psychological safety for organizational learning and all that. But are you telling me I can't hold people accountable, right? For excellence, for good performance, right? I need to be able to hold people accountable at work. I need to have high standards and hold people's feet close to the fire and make sure they do a good job. And so is it a matter of finding, the right point on this balance beam between psychological safety, which helps learning and teamwork, and accountability, which helps performance? And my response is always, I can absolutely understand why you may see these as a tension, as a trade-off. And I think that's the wrong mental model. I actually don't think it's the most useful or productive way to think about this problem. What's a better way to think about it? I think these are two, maybe not completely separate, but at least conceptually independent dimensions, both of which are very, very important for managers, leaders to think about, to manage. So what are the two dimensions? One is this dimension I've been talking about, which is psychological safety. It can be very, very low in a workplace, or it can be very, very high. I recommend high.
Can it be too high?
I don't think so. But in order to explain why I don't think so, I need to explain the second dimension, and then we'll circle back. So the second dimension is, in many ways, good old-fashioned performance management. I need to clearly communicate goals, expectations. I need to make sure you get feedback on your work, that help you improve. I need to put in place various things to make you motivated to do a good job. We don't have to get into the details of those. In many ways, those attributes are quite well understood. They vary in different organizations and industries, but they're reasonably well understood. And so what I think is patently obvious is that if you don't have psychological safety or accountability, then you have a pretty sorry state of affairs, right? Then you have people who are kind of showing up for work and mentally they're not there. They've quit and stayed, right? Apathy. If, and this is what the executives I know worry about, if I only think about psychological safety and I'm not doing a good job on ensuring excellence, then, maybe people are in the comfort zone. And that's, actually, I would argue it's not only wasteful. I think that's what they worry about, that it's wasteful. I would argue it's not only wasteful, it's actually not a very exciting place to work, right? You don't really want to come to work each day and sit in the comfort zone. You might think you do, but you really don't. However, consider, what if we're really just absolutely focused on the performance aspect and it's not psychologically safe? Then you've got people who are in the anxiety zone. And I happen to think that's a very dangerous place for any organization, whether you're financial services, rocket ship program, a hospital, or even a product development company. If people are deeply anxious, they know what's expected of them, but they're afraid to ask for help. Or they feel each other is competition and they're afraid to share their knowledge. You're in trouble. You may not see it today, but it will show up in the bottom line eventually. So what do you need? You need both, right? So here's why you need both, and that's the high performance quadrant. That's the learning quadrant. That's where I feel it's okay to come to work and be myself, offer my knowledge. It's okay to fail, make mistakes, and I know what we're trying to do together. And I am absolutely dedicated, committed to getting there. So why do I say you can't have too much psychological safety? It's partly a definitional issue. I think if you've got both the performance management dimension, the accountability dimension, and the psychological safety dimension, the performance dimension will take care of the problems you're worrying about when you say you can have too much. Because I think what you're worrying about is, if people have too much psychological safety, they'll just speak up with every stupid thought that ever walked through their mind. That won't happen if there's clarity about the goal, feedback about performance, and all of the various things that go into producing excellent performance. So this is partly, I recognize, a way I've defined the phenomenon. But I want you to be afraid of the competition. I want you to be afraid of our company not succeeding. I don't want you to be afraid of your boss. I don't want you to be afraid of your colleagues. Because I will argue, if you're afraid of your boss and afraid of your colleagues, you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving excellence on the table. You're not offering that crazy idea. And, I mean, what does that mean if I know quite literally that my performance rating, and all of us are, we would like to do well, and I think that's a laudable attribute.
Well, the performance rating is worthless if it doesn't make you aspire to do well.
Right, that's true. So let's say I really do want to do well, and I'm aware that there's a forced ranking. Mm-hmm. That means I can, quite literally, it's not even an exaggeration, I can only do well if you do less well.
Exactly.
Oh, great. What does that produce? That produces a subtle or not so subtle unwillingness to share my knowledge with you. That produces a subtle unwillingness to help you when I see that you're in a bind, or to team up with you. I mean, I cannot fall in love with you the way I want to fall in love with you if we're going to do great work together.
And the irony is then we go in a team building course where we have to compete against each other together with soldiers.
Yeah.
And walk on fire. And I'm curious because you get this idea of the burning platform all the time as a precondition for a good change initiatives. How do you view the burning platform? Because isn't it detrimental to psychological safety? Sometimes
you do have a burning platform. Like you've just declared Chapter 11. The company's on fire. You can't just pretend nothing's wrong. You have to do something different. But do we get better performance? No. I mean, I think in general, the higher the anxiety, you don't have better performance. You have less. You have constriction of creative cognition. You have all sorts of challenges you have to deal with. But fundamentally, I can still have psychological safety with a burning platform. It's okay to be in a pickle, so long as we're in it together, right? Here we are. We're 750 meters underground. We're on a burning platform. What we need to do is absolutely work together to figure out a solution to keeping ourselves alive and sane. Full stop. Right? It's so the being in a dire situation is not the same as lacking psychological safety. Lacking psychological safety is when I'm, in a bizarre way, more worried about what you think of me than about the burning platform. A competitor is stealing our market share, or a product that we've just launched has failed badly, or something like that.
But I'm curious because in my culture, praise is, people love praise.
Of course.
And,
what culture is different than that, I wonder?
Exactly, but it's like the solution to the lack of psychological safety in a lot of organizations, that managers should praise employees. Yet that also has some dynamics about, yes, you know you're liked, but from a knowledge creation experience or being allowed to fail, there's some complex adverse effects at play, isn't there?
Yes, I think sometimes I've misnamed the concept, but it had a prior history, so I went with it. And what I mean by psychological safety is more like candor. So in many ways, a truly psychologically safe workplace is one in which people are very direct. This isn't about being nice or always praising, but actually respecting you enough to also tell you the places I think you're falling short. And I expect you to do the same for me. Because what we have,
we're in it together.
We're in it together. And what's at stake here is far more important than my often fragile ego. But I can get out, Chris Argyris once said to me, he talked about how it's very important not to be brittle. And many of us, especially many high-achieving people, are brittle. And I said, Chris, I'm a little worried about that because I think I am brittle in many ways. He says, yes, but you're not brittle about being brittle. And he was right. It's like I can kind of step back and take a look at myself being brittle. I would rather have praise than criticism, absolutely. But I can also recognize the problem with that, right? I can recognize that I won't get better if I don't also get the criticism. And I can recognize that the beautiful idea I just had, or the beautiful paper I just wrote, isn't yet perfect. It needs some rubbing around and improving before it gets better. So a psychologically safe environment is one in which we respect each other enough to tell each other the truth, and we don't expect it to be held against us. If you are babying me, you're not respecting me. So I don't want you to baby me.
But I see a lot of high-level conversations in organizations where managers are asked by senior management for recommendations, to be specific, to share the headlines. This is a go, or this is not go.
Right,
and,
black or white.
I want your opinion.
Right.
That's what your role is in this meeting, so we can move on.
Right. You could just vote. You could just stay at your desk and vote. Why do we get together? Right? Why do we put a number of very smart, talented, well-educated people around a table? Right? We ought to really expect that there's a possibility of synergy, or we shouldn't do it. And by synergy, I mean that we together can produce something that's more than the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. Because if we can make a decision or get something done by simply, I look at it, I add my thing, I throw it over the wall, you add your thing, let's do that. That's easier.
Yeah, we can do that by email.
Right. Sometimes we get in trouble by email.
Yeah, and then for different reasons.
Yeah. We're not always perfect communicators. So the behaviors that are essential to organizational learning, the behaviors that one might find in the learning organization, are not always the taken. Let me start over. So there's a set there. There are a set of behaviors we need to see to create organizational learning. And if you try to tell people, here are the behaviors, lots of inquiry, Lots of testing, experimentation, very thoughtful, thorough feedback and analysis and so on. People can learn those behaviors, and they're unlikely to exercise them in the moments in which they're needed unless they have a mindset of curiosity, commitment and passion to accomplishing something that we don't yet think we're perfect at, and really just a general sense of openness and awareness that I don't know everything. If I keep having that mindset, if I keep putting that mindset deliberately on, I'll naturally ask questions. I don't need to be given a checklist of behaviors that I should act in. I do need to keep pushing myself to adopt a mindset that makes learning behaviors very natural from the mindset.
And yet it seems some people have a higher level of maturity to be able to handle different opinions in their teams, and a higher level of authority to keep the process on track and be meaningful for all participants. How do people grow to that level of maturity where they can take a larger team responsibility and be worthwhile for their team?
I think people can and do grow to that level of maturity, and I agree with you that this is a very a highly skilled and highly mature set of attributes.
Yeah, because it's not a technical skill.
No.
Like you just say this
I
and then
learn,
you get that output.
Right. I learned to use Excel, or I
to ask, what are you thinking?
Right. Right. Anybody knows how to ask, what are you thinking, right?
Exactly.
It's not a high-skilled action. The extraordinary thing is that it just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It happens so rarely. Why? Because we lie to ourselves without noticing that we're lying to ourselves and think we know everything. I think I see reality. I think I have privileged access to what's so. And so I forget, quite literally, to ask you, what are you seeing? What are you seeing that I might miss? So I don't see this as a personality issue. This isn't some people could be leaders and other people can't. I see this as a skill and mindset issue that actually does come from and with greater maturity, greater emotional intelligence, more concern for what we can do and accomplish than for, what do you think of me? So a kind of a commitment to a motivating purpose that allows me to get over myself, because I know there's something that's more important than my ego, right? So people over time and with experience can develop their passion, can develop their maturity, even develop their curiosity. It sounds funny because children are naturally curious, but then we lose it. So they can develop these attributes, and the more they develop them, the better leaders they become. People often ask me, well, what about Steve Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Jobs was a genius, right? He had extraordinary insights into design, into kind of users' needs, a very good ability to just, pick up an object and say, yeah, this is going to work, or this needs to change. If you're a genius, if you're Steve Jobs, you can get away with the behaviors he got away with.
Yeah.
But he was interpersonally extremely immature. He was like a spoiled child in many of his interactions in the workplace, especially in his own company.
So
it wouldn't be a recipe for success, right? If you wanted to go and lead a successful company, I would not advise belittling, yelling at, screaming at other people, saying you're the only one who really has the best idea. It's not a way to actually produce excellence. A few rare people throughout history can get away with that and produce greatness. most of us have to develop maturity.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that maturity is an individual skill or if it's a team skill. Do the best leaders have all the competencies you're discussing, or do they have them present in the totality of their team?
It's a very good point. I think very few. I don't want this to ultimately be an individualistic notion. I study teaming, right? So it's not about the great man or the great woman. It's actually about clarity and perspective that's sufficient to lead processes by which we get multiple voices into the discussion in a useful, thoughtful way. So even that, though, may overstate the role of a single leader. I say that the leader has the responsibility for process, but sometimes I really have skin in the game on a particular decision, or I have a lot of emotions about this decision. It's something I hold dear, I care about it. And so I might not be the best person to make sure we're adhering to the principles of great learning process in this moment. In that case, I'd expect and hope someone else can chime in and just comment on what's happening and make sure we hear from the silent voices and make sure we drill down into the thinking of various people on the issues at hand, because I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm too plugged in or hooked. So no one person is ever going to have all the skills or all the answers, and therefore we need to get better at teaming, both in decision making, in leading, and in sort of carrying out the tasks through which we serve customers.
I think some of the case studies you have published, they make it very clear that this can actually be life or death, or failure or profit for organizations like NASA, the Chilean and Microsoft, and consultancies like IDEO. But yet we see a lot of companies performing very well in spite of these detrimental behaviors.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how can an organization discover the potential of utilizing the knowledge already present in the organization in a better way? Because we're very good at measuring success, what happens in spite of behaviors, in spite of management systems and practices. But how do we discover if teaming is really valuable for us, or if it's just, it sounds more ethical or better or makes sense, but getting down to business on it?
We can measure results, of course, but we can also measure the quality of our processes, the quality of our information gathering, the quality of our analyses, the quality of our kind of experimentation, and so on. And if we're paying close attention to those processes, which are absolutely essential processes in any organization that exists in a changing world, then we can also give ourselves feedback on how we're doing along the way. I would argue, and can show with data in a variety of settings, that good processes are going to produce good outcomes. But we tend to spend all our time measuring the outcomes and not paying enough attention to the learning processes.
So do you see waste in that sense in most organizations, or missed potential?
There is missed potential. If we're not paying attention to the process, we don't know where the waste is. Right? We don't know, and we're not being very analytical about it. We don't know which of the activities we're doing are the ones that are producing the value that we're producing. We don't know what we've left on the table.
And are there industries or specific companies where they are better at measuring the value of their processes?
There are. In any number of industries, you can find not every industry, but in many industries, you can find a far leading competitor. The organization that's just head and shoulders above the crowd in terms of its profitability, its customer satisfaction and so on. When that's the case, that's generally an organization that is, in fact, a very good learning organization, because they're constantly on top of it.
So you look at results to identify where to dig deeper.
Yes, I and my colleagues, I mean, there are many other people doing it. So, for example, Southwest Airlines, I haven't studied Southwest myself, but in the US, their built-in learning mechanisms and teaming mechanisms put them far ahead of any other airline in terms of profitability, on-time performance, customer satisfaction, and they're a low-end airline, right? They're they're the Ryanair, and yet they're friendly. People love them. What are they? They're a learning organization. Everything they do every day is designed to help us be great today and better tomorrow. And they're an outlier. And they're happy to invite any other airline in to take a look at what they do. But others don't necessarily take them up on the invitation.
Do you see any professions or career pathways that promotes teaming? You're an engineer yourself?
I was, maybe, a long time ago.
You forgot?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, engineers in general, I think, are very, at least temperamentally, very interested in data and willing to look at it dispassionately. Right. So it's in some sense, we're trying to imbue a little bit more of that mindset in managers more widely. I am a big believer in synergy. Right? Anything that's sufficiently complicated in an organization to be interesting is not done by or completely controlled by any one individual. Right? You don't care for a hospitalized patient anymore with one single expert doing everything that patient needs. It's a whole host of different roles, different specialties, working together in hopefully a very seamless, choreographed whole program of care. Most of the time, it falls short of that mark. So we err in over-attributing outcomes to individuals, and then we lose the opportunity to create more than the sum of the parts, the synergy that can happen when we're teaming at our best.
Yeah, and sometimes we can also lose the learning mindset in the individual, because if they're not performing, maybe they didn't really have the talent.
Right,
in
right. And,
well,
I mean, I would take it further. I would say in some sense, I mean, they're talented people, be sure. They're people who are more talented in certain disciplines than other people. And the talent is meaningless if you can't put it to good use in an interdependent setting where the talent, such as it is interacting beautifully with other talent. And the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So it's as if when people often talk about the talent crisis or shortage, they're thinking all we need to do is get these, the very smartest people and hire them and all will be well. Nothing could be further from the truth. You could have less on paper smart people working together more effectively, and you'll have better results than if you get a bunch of highly talented but highly egotistic players on board. So talent is created in action by challenging and important and meaningful work and collaborative relationships.
And yet I assume as a Harvard professor, you'll be meeting a lot of the people who are really at the top of their game, because they seek out.
It's true.
Howard, and I'm wondering, some of those people must have a crisis when they see the other people at Harvard Business School, that the level of the game can be much higher than what they've encountered outside.
It's the oldest story in the book. I was the number one in my high school, or I was the number one in my town, or whatever it is, and then I come to this much more elite place, and all of a sudden, my whole identity is shattered, because my whole identity was based on being the best. So yes, this is a syndrome. This is a very well-known syndrome at highly elite organizations, whether they're universities or corporations known to hire the talent. And it can be a devastating experience for people. And some find it so devastating they don't ever fully rise to the very great potential they have. But others can take a turn and find new meaning in the wonderful opportunity to work closely together with other very bright, very high-achieving people.
From a learning perspective, you actually gain more from being the worst performer who got in. Right.
You're the lucky one, right? You're getting all those brains that you get to learn from. Whereas if you played it not to lose, and you went somewhere where you would be the unquestioned best, what are you going to learn?
Exactly.
Not much.
But as a lecturer and teacher, do you have things you consider to alleviate the psychological problems of that? Because you want to create a classroom environment where failure is creating learning. And yet you have people who have a psychological stake at not failing and proving that they made the right decision going to the studies they chose.
I think that there are things that we can and do to create a psychologically safe classroom, a place where people can learn to define their experience not by being the best, but by learning the most, and by the sheer excitement of being around and working with other equally motivated and capable people. It is a hurdle, and it can be a reorientation for people.
Yeah, but you also have to grade the same people.
That's true. So I mean, it's really it's a shift.
So it's like you have a double
we do. Hopefully, everybody can shine in something. You have 11 courses in your first year. You're not going to be the top in every single one of them. Someone's got, we have to do that. We have a that's really a faculty disciplining device, not as much as a student disciplining device. The kind of the curve, the grading curve. But I think it's a matter of making the shift from playing not to lose, which we all do in various ways throughout our lives at different times, right? I'm gonna protect against loss, and playing to win. So if I'm playing the game of, I want to be the smartest in the class, I can pull that off depending on where I go, but I lose so much more. I'm playing not to lose, not playing to win. Playing to win is to go for it, right? To have something that matters more than my own ego, to have the opportunity to play a role in making some difference, large or small, on earth while I'm here, and to go for it, and to take risks, and to team up, and to fail well, and learn fast, and then start all over again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.